good. Thank you for having us today, Alana, and to the group for supporting us. And Colleen, I really enjoyed your presentation, and it really touched upon some things that Caleb and I are going to touch upon as well. So we're going to talk today, and we really want it to be much more of a conversation about regeneration in Tampa Bay and looking at health and the environment on a bioregional scale. So I'll introduce myself. Oh, I think we're going to go to the introduction slide next. We're going to start with the grounding. Yeah, so we always like to start with the grounding. Caleb and I have this practice together and many other groups that we're in. What are you grateful for in the Tampa Bay region? And if you're not from the Tampa Bay region, what are you grateful for wherever you live, whether it's Jacksonville, New Orleans, or whatever land you're sitting on? And you can either raise your hand or put something in the chat. Anything you're grateful for. I'll just start out by saying I moved from Washington, D.C., and every day, particularly during the winter, I am grateful for the sunshine. Alana beat me to it. Yeah, I'm grateful for sunshine. Anybody else want to share something? Okay. Beautiful habitats, state parks, water, right? How easy it is to move around the region, right? So really highlighting some things about the natural spaces and the environments we live in. Good, I think, shall we move to the next? I'm grateful for the breeze, good birding, access to water, kind neighbors. Yeah, it's always important to, I kind of think it's always important to remind ourselves what we're grateful for, because in our culture a lot, we can be conditioned to think about we don't have enough or something's not quite right. We focus on what's not right. So waking up every day with gratitude is a good start. Bill Bilodeau said the ability to grow food year round. Wonderful. Thank you, Bill. Yeah, so I'll introduce myself briefly. I grew up in Florida in the 60s and 70s when there were less than 25 million people here, and the whole place just felt wild to me. It was probably the population was 5 to 6 million. And then I left Florida for North Carolina to go to college and to medical school, and ended up in Washington, D.C., working for the National Institutes of Health, where I studied cancer. And it was there that I really got interested in not just cancer treatment, but how can we prevent cancer, and then really looking at the environmental impacts on human health. And so I moved back to Florida so I could wear flip-flops year round and go to the beach and have sunshine. And I'm currently an instructor at a couple of collegiate schools. And then I also run a consulting business called Healthy Planet, Healthy People. And I'm going to turn it over to Caleb so he can introduce himself.
Thank you, Maria. Yeah, I'm Caleb Quaid. I'm the founder and president of Regenerative Shift, which is a Tampa-based environmental consulting firm that focuses on regenerative project management, which some of that will be talked about a little bit today. And then also my firm does quite a bit with the Inflation Reduction Act, so helping businesses, nonprofit organizations, municipalities to leverage the various funding for renewable energy efficiency, and other climate-related projects under the Inflation Reduction Act and the various programs there, which I know the Regional Planning Council does quite a bit with. Today, we're going to talk about kind of regeneration within the context of the Tampa Bay region, and what does that look like as it relates to human health and then scaling it. A little bit of a background. I saw recently that only 4% of Americans were familiar with regenerative agriculture. Which, at least enough to be able to answer basic questions on what it is. But those in this room probably may be familiar with it, but if you're familiar with regeneration, it probably starts in agriculture, because that's really where the movement mostly started, which is in contrast to industrial big ag that we typically see. It's important to note, indigenous traditions that go back thousands of years, but as a term, regenerative agriculture started growth in the 60s and 70s, and largely kind of corresponds with the permaculture movement. So very synergistic principles in both permaculture and regenerative agriculture that I'll get into here in a moment. From an agricultural perspective, regenerative agriculture starts with healthy living soil. So And that is done with certain practices, including being chemical free, not disturbing the soil, using ground covers, having diversity of crops and stuff, the things that promote healthy soil like nature typically has without your interference. And this is important. Healthy soil is, environmental health. Healthy soil produces healthier food. There's lots of studies to back this up, but it's also fairly intuitive that if you have healthy living soil, it's going to create healthier food for your body. Healthy soil also is the building blocks of life and our ecosystem. So whereas if you have a wheat field that's been sprayed with glyphosate, that wheat field, and you pick up a handful of soil, it might literally have no life whatsoever alive in the dirt. It's entirely reliant on outside inputs. Healthy soil, whether managed regeneratively or just soil that's been left alone in the forest or wherever it may be, is going to have more microbes in it, more life in it in a handful than there are people on this planet. And that's the building blocks of our food chain and our ecosystems. The little tiny microbes get eaten by the plants and little bugs, all the way up to the, supporting the whole ecosystem like we all learned in elementary school and how food chains work. Additionally, and this is huge for the Tampa Bay region and many regions around the world, but healthy soil cleans water. Healthy soil is porous and water soaks into it, infiltrates into the ground, makes its way, gets eaten, the nutrients that are in it get eaten by microbes on the way down. It makes its way through filtering systems that are natural all the way down into our aquifers, ultimately up into springs that feed our rivers and feed the Tampa Bay. And it's cleans water, and it has the added benefit of it eliminates the need for chemicals that pollute our water. I think most of us know that red tide is largely caused by the fertilizers and the treatments that we put on our lawns and in our agriculture settings. And so you get this twofer of it, both cleans water and it eliminates, the need for these very harmful pollutants. And the one that I think, really for me was an aha moment when I learned it 4 or 5 years ago, but is, drives a lot of the conversations that we have, is healthy soil is a natural carbon sink. It can store tons and tons of carbon per acre. There's a Rodale Institute study that's often cited that was done in 2014 and then done with larger data in 2020 that looked at all the global cropland and pasture land and said, if we converted that to regenerative practices from their current practices, what would that look like from a carbon sink perspective? And the answer the study says is it would offset our global carbon emissions. Now, that there's a lot of work to do there. That's not necessarily practical in many cases, but it's a huge puzzle piece. And when we factor that in along with our, in some cases, emissions reduction and other practices that we're doing, can be the biggest puzzle piece that we have for managing this carbon as an overall climate strategy. And so that's, kind of how it works in agriculture. But regeneration goes beyond agriculture. There is regenerative land management practices, which a lot of that is what we're going to be talking about today as it relates to health and our region. But generally speaking, regeneration is a systems-based design approach that focuses on creating the conditions for life to thrive. And that's human life, and that's all life in the ecosystem that we're in. This is applicable as a design system across basically every system that we have, energy, food, transportation, waste, governance. There are ways that we can approach things more regeneratively, more life-centered than we have. And at its core, it's really a mindset shift to realizing that we are participants within a living system and that we are interconnected with that system. And so how we design our cities like Jacksonville or regions like the Tampa Bay region or our backyards, is interconnected to the life that's around it, right? And so with my company, we tagline is life at the center, right? Is life at the center of your decision making is really the core question as we frame the regenerative movement. And Maria and I have had a lot of conversations on using life and health interchangeably, right? Is health at the center of what we're doing? I know Maria, with her background as a doctor, has a lot of interest in health. So I'll turn it back over here to talk about regeneration and health.
Yeah, thank you so much, Caleb. Yeah, and you can just move on to the next slide. I think I've introduced myself. Yeah, so I always like to start way beyond the 20,000-foot view, and I don't know how far above the earth this is, but again, I just want you to take a few seconds to look at this and notice what gets generated inside of you. Is there a thought, a feeling, a sensation in your body? And if you want to drop something in the chat, you can. when I look, I always like to start with this picture because I think from this view, I'm struck by how beautiful our planet is. I'm also sort of struck that you can't tell where Duval County is or where Hillsborough County is, right? That the natural landscape of the planet it does not show those things, right? And I feel so grateful to live in such a beautiful place. So I always like to show this just as an anchor. And I also want to mention that, yeah, so Alana, thank you, put in, we're so tiny, but we can have a big impact. We are so tiny, but we can have a big impact. A view I saw in a flying dream is what somebody wrote in. Yeah. Yeah, Alan, thank you for that. I want to mention that water, water, water. Yeah, Bill, water everywhere. Water everywhere on the planet. So Bill touched upon something I like to start out with is that our entire life and all living beings really rely upon three things we have very little to do with: air, water, and soil, right? These are the very essential things for our life, even though I personally feel like if the internet goes out, that's essential for my life, right? In modern society, we think many things are essential, like cars and stuff like that, and they certainly make our lives easier, but the very basic things we need for survival are air, water, and soil to grow food, because we need air, water, and food. Yeah, so and the other thing I just want to mention, because I think there's an arc of time we're dealing with here, is that until recently, we were not able to see images of the planet like this. And there's something called the overview effect that has to do with being able to see images of the Earth and the impact that is having upon human beings. Yeah. Next slide, please, Caleb. Douglas wrote, Pinellas County showed up on that distinctly, a peninsula on a peninsula, right? So I also like to start out here with the balancing of the 3 Ps. This is sometimes called the triple bottom line. See, most people have their cameras off, but how many people have seen an image like this before? You can raise your hand or raise your mechanical hand. Yeah, most people have seen it, right? So I will say that historically and until recently, the focus has really been on profit over people and over the planet. And I say that because the EPA was formed in the 1970s, which really began, we began looking hard, at least in the United States, about our land use practices and our land stewardship. And then I would also say that until recent history, we've had many extractive practices on human beings. I'll speak mostly to the United States. An extreme example is slavery as a way that the country was built. So sometimes when I talk about regeneration or think about regeneration, I think, well, what is the opposite of regeneration? And to me, it's sort of processes in which we just take something. It's extractive and something else is put into peril because of that extractive process. So this is called the triple bottom line of the 3 Ps: planet, people, and profit. And that when all are in balance is probably the most sustainable way of living. Okay, Caleb, next slide, please. And just keep me on time. So if I'm, okay. You have 30 minutes to walk on your lunch break. What's look more appealing or safer? So Colleen really touched upon this a lot in her presentation about where are we going to develop, where are walkable places. Yeah, most people might be having a gut feeling. I showed this to a friend and she said, well, if it's 30 minutes, I'm going to want to get in my car and turn on the air conditioner and listen to the radio on my lunch break, right? But for me, I'd rather walk in the picture on the right. It's greener, it's more peaceful, it's more calming, it soothes my nervous system. I don't know where this picture is from. The picture on the left is about 6 blocks from my home along Hillsborough Avenue. I think whenever we talk about walkable cities, I think what we need is a sidewalk rating system, right? Every sidewalk is not equal. The sidewalk, so on a scale of 1 to 5, I give the sidewalk on the right a 5. And I'd give the sidewalk on the left a 1. It's a sidewalk up against a busy urban street. There's no protection from heat. And there's no real protection from traffic. You're walking up against traffic. Okay, next slide, please. Yeah, so there's been a phenomenal shift. So I'm a physician by training. There's been a phenomenal shift in the healthcare world about looking at nature as an integrative approach to healthcare. Partly this has been driven by data. Studies that have shown the benefit of nature on things like cancer, diabetes, asthma, obesity, clinical depression, social isolation, and anxiety. And then can we advance it one more? in 35 states, physicians now write prescriptions for health. They use little prescription pads to tell people, please take 3 walks outside or in nature. So I want to say, I think there's a difference between a walk down the sidewalk I just showed you on the left and a walk in a park or a green space. A lot of the studies have looked at people having access to green spaces to have outdoor activity. Next slide, Caleb. I think I'm doing okay on time.
Mhm.
Yeah, so again, Colleen really set us up for this. Let's get a drink of water here. So the major impact to human health is extreme heat. The statistics on the right are weather-related deaths from 2022 in the US, and you can see that by far and away, heat is the worst. Those deaths down here, I think 124, this was 2022, so this was probably mostly related to Hurricane Ian that came on shore in Southwest Florida. And again, an image explaining the heat island effect. I think Colleen did a really nice job talking about being able to measure the differences between downtown places that have lots of impervious surface and this heat island effect. Okay, next slide, please, Caleb. Yeah, and again, to touch upon air pollution and regenerative land practices, about 45 million people in the US live, work, or go to school within 300 feet of a road that has high air pollution due to motor vehicles. This probably mostly focuses on interstate highways or larger urban highways. And there's a lot of data to show the effect this has on human health, cardiovascular disease, strokes. We now know that particulate matter and the air pollution can get into the bloodstream and cause big problems with brain development, mental health, dementia, and problems with reproductive illness. So one of the things we should consider doing as we begin to build out on the picture up on the right is a green buffer between a highway and development. So really thinking carefully about what we're constructing next to a highway. So for instance, I personally sometimes say, no future schools should be built next to an interstate highway because of the impact on children's health. And on the left is a project going on in Tampa Bay and Hillsborough called Plan Hillsborough, and they're using tiny air quality monitors to better look at microclimates, areas of air pollution in communities of where there's environmental justice issues. Next slide, Caleb. Lastly, want to touch upon to bring home this regenerative agriculture is that urban agriculture is on the rise. The USDA has been putting more and more funding into urban agriculture, and this is really a win-win-win solution when it comes to looking at those three Ps in terms of how it can benefit planet, economics, and the people. So on the left is a relatively new urban farm in Tampa called Meacham Urban Farms. This farm has got a couple unique features. It's basically almost built under Interstate 4. So they took an old lot. It took a year to kind of pull all the rubble out of the ground, and now there's this productive farm growing there. And then on the right is something called Sky Farm. This is a rooftop car park, right? So what are the innovative approaches that we can use for regenerative land development within urban cores? And this is being planned out in Australia, and it's estimated that it's going to produce 5 tons of fresh produce each year that will be kept in the community. Next slide, Philip. Yeah, and lastly, I want to just talk about a few systems approach. So in the health realm, we look at the determinants of health, and some of our determinants of health are fixed. Our age, our biology, our gender, those things are somewhat fixed. But there's things called social determinants of health that really are health where it starts where we live, work, learn, and play. So the two we're really touching upon, although I really separate them in columns like this, is so many of these interact with each other, but the neighborhood and the physical environment is really a great way to start with regenerative land approaches and also food production and access to healthy food options. One of the things I've been extremely encouraged to see in Tampa in the past couple of years is that places like the Tampa Family Health Clinics and Tampa General Hospital are building community gardens on site at some of their locations, and the produce is for their patients and their clients. It's going to be particularly helpful in places where there's not as much access to fresh produce. Next slide, Caleb. I think we're right at 250. I just want to share with you briefly, some of you may have heard about a couple of these frameworks, but Planetary Health is an emerging framework that's about 10 years old. It's a new transdisciplinary research paradigm. Typically, the medical sciences looked at systems within the human body, and we've really focused on, let's just fix this single body. But now Planetary Health is really looking more broadly to the external systems, including the planet, and social systems that threaten and really cause enormous impacts on human health. And I think I'll stop there, Caleb. Is there anything else? Oh, okay.
Thank you, Maria. So, regeneration is critical for health, both of human health and our ecosystem health. And we wanted to kind of the last topic to go through here today is how we can start to frame that within the region of Tampa Bay, where we most of us are here and where this meeting is convening about. And so the beauty of regeneration is that like life, regeneration can work at any scale that you do it, right? So at a small scale, folks are probably familiar with the fire bush as a plant. And if you have, your St. Augustine lawn and you change only one thing, and you put one fire bush in the middle of that lawn, 6 months from now, you will have more butterflies, more bees, and maybe some hummingbirds coming to your life. You've created the conditions that will allow life to emerge, and life will flock to that, right? And I think we know that intuitively, that it can be done at a scale of one plant or one yard or one business or one organization, one community, one city. And so in this region, a couple just quick projects to highlight that are starting to do this, that are, would argue would want to be doing many, many more of these. The one in the middle is Little Red Wagon Native Nursery, and the Tampa Bay Butterfly Foundation did a butterfly garden installation assembly at DeSoto Elementary. So now DeSoto Elementary has students that have learned about life, that are incorporating more life principles into their education. And they have this beautiful habitat that now is a host plant and larval and nectar plant on their campus right there, that adds some beauty and adds habitat right in our school systems. I know lots of schools do this type of thing, and this could be something that we'd love to see in many more places. And then the city of Tampa's has a no-mow program. I know a lot of communities do, and this is in a Forest Hills Park, and it's essentially this large area that is largely unkempt, but they put up signs that says, hey, we're not mowing here because we're supporting wildlife habitat. And so that creates the potential for lower maintenance cost in a location like a park where it's convenient. And with the signage there, it creates some education and some understanding, and people start to look for the beautiful butterflies or birds instead of the beautiful grass or whatever it may be in that area. So, just simple things like this that are being done on some scales, but how do we look at doing them all over the place? Like there should be no-mow zones in many, many places. Regeneration at its largest scale that's been done so far, at least in modern times, is the project in China at the Lowe's Plateau. And this was a project where over 12 years, they took a portion of China, this plateau area that fed into what was called the Yellow River because of how much erosion and runoff typically ran into this river. It got the name the Yellow River. And really with not much more than shovels and labor, terraced the land in such a way that water was captured, planted some seeds. And in 12 years, really a remarkable story of land restoration, huge carbon sinks, size of a country, project that lifted 2.5 million people out of poverty. Lots of really interesting stuff. If you're interested and haven't seen it, would recommend Kiss the Ground, which is a documentary that talks about this project quite a bit. But so in China, just as a point, is doing 12 more of these right now, right? And so anything politics aside, and anything that might be on that front, they will benefit greatly from the natural resources that they're cultivating and the wealth that they're creating with their land with these types of projects. And there's some of these that are happening in the United States to some degree. And I think there's opportunities. What we're talking about here is how do we start to think this way about the Tampa Bay region? And so some quick definitions of bioregional and ecoregional scales. So on the left is a bioregion scale, which is most of Florida going up into Georgia here. The southern coastal plain is the general bioregion as it's defined by the US government there. And it's a large area of land that has coastlines or mountain ranges that define it, that have similar plants and animals in it, and has interdependent hydrological patterns that unite the region. And so an ecoregion, probably the scale we're talking more on today, in the Tampa Bay area, is, is a little bit smaller, but still pretty large, like our whole region here. And this is a map that kind of largely maps to the Tampa Bay Estuary Program, who I know is on the call, and looking at the different types of land that we have here, and still is geographically, ecologically, and hydrologically interconnected, and it's nested within this larger bioregion. And what's important to note is that the primary way that nature organizes itself is in these nested systems. So rivers are nested within watersheds, which are nested within ecoregions, which are nested within bioregions, which are nested within the larger regions that govern our whole planet. And so if we're looking at how we're designing our systems and our resiliency as a region or as a city, let's look at how it fits into nature's patterns to do so. So one example of this that's taking place in the Pacific Northwest is the Cascadia bioregion, which is some parts or all of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Northern California, and British Columbia, and then some other areas there. And they've been doing this, and there's a lot of information. I don't have time to touch on it today as we're running out of time, but some resources down at the bottom that you can look up in. But a really good example of how, at a very large scale, humans have in this continent started to organize bioregionally with great success. And the conversation thought starter for the 4 minutes we have left in this in this meeting here today is, what does regeneration look like as a Tampa Bay ecoregion? And this, I know Tampa Bay Estuary Program is on the call here. This information comes from their website. But if you have the audacious goal of regenerating Tampa Bay, as a body of water and as a region, water quality, life in the water, the thriving fish and animal life in there is critical. Looking at how do you eliminate the red tides and things like that, these big macro challenges that we're facing. It doesn't just start in looking in the bay. It very obviously starts at the bodies of water and the land that feed the inputs into that bay. And the beauty of looking at something eco-regionally or bioregionally is that is how nature does it, right? And so generally speaking, the Tampa Bay evaporates into clouds that then rains, goes back into the ground, soaks into aquifers, comes out as springs, and works its way back down, ultimately the Hillsborough River and other rivers back into the bay. And that's what we're doing. So while we may have limited input on sea level rise as a region, we have a huge input on water quality and ecosystems and life within the region. And so following the patterns of nature, want to see how a lot of the things that we're already doing. So for example, the Tampa Bay Regional Planning Council, where we're talking today, has been organizing largely bioregionally, at least regionally. There's definitely some different lines in there, but there's a lot of cross-pollination that can happen there too. The Tampa Bay Estuary Program has been looking at it this way of how do we create regional systems for health for our estuaries. And then there are many, many other organizations, the Connection Partners, my company, Regenerative Shift, the Water Institute, the counties, Pasco and Hillsborough County, and others that are on here that are all working on projects that fit somewhere into a context or potentially fit somewhere into the context of a larger bioregional design goal. And so with the very little bit of time left, kind of wanted to turn it over for any thoughts, comments, discussion on how does the work that we're doing, each of us that are on this call, how does this fit into a bioregional context? And is that something, is there something that doesn't fit, something that, have question on? How can we start to use this as a framework to guide our future discussions around life? So I'll stop the share.
Thanks so much, Caleb and Maria. Great presentation. And I remember being back in grad school and just learning about this whole systems style of management, and it really seems to be coming to the forefront of how we're governing our natural resources and us as well. And it reminds me of Hillsborough's One Water concept, which they adopted that at that county scale, but it's really recognizing that water doesn't, stop at these jurisdictional boundaries. We have to manage it as a larger system. And so I know that's one example that I could think of. Like to open it up though. Does anyone else have some other examples, like locally? How are you integrating these more regenerative type of, or systems approaches to your work? I know we included it in our regional resilience action plan, at least when it comes to managing water, but I think everything that we do, we should be advocating for low impact development and, just thinking about our systems is it doesn't just stop, at the end of Pinellas County, right? It's going to go into Pasco County. It's going to impact Hillsborough County. And so we really have to work together as a region. That's why these calls get me so excited, because we have all of you in the same room and we can start to manage this, as a region and not just individually. Kevin, I see you.
Yeah, I'll go first. One thing we're talking about, and it goes along with part of our water issues of water conservation, is reducing the amount of sod, turf grasses in yards. And this is a land use topic. If there's anybody who's successfully written into their landscaping codes limiting the amounts of turf, I know the city of Tampa made a good effort. Unfortunately, what it's resulted in, at least my neighborhood, is everybody's paving their backyards. So it's certainly not a better solution than grass, in my opinion, because there's just like a lot of people put in fake turf or pavers. So I'd like to avoid that. That's not a solution we want. But if there's been any successful landscaping code changes regionally, I'd like to hear about it. And we're going to try to explore it. It's a very touchy topic, especially with all the HOAs that enforce their green lawn rules. So,
Kevin, I'm glad you brought that up. Actually, our agency on Bay, it just changed. Bay and Coastal Management now is it's the name. But this, at least the artificial turf, was a topic that we were focusing on for a little while, and hopefully we continue to focus on it. But we did work with some students over at Stetson, and they pulled together a big policy analysis of our region and the rest of Florida and even elsewhere, looking at different artificial turf policies. And I think that kind of extends to regular turf too, in terms of like, defining like the amount of permeability within a yard and stuff. So anyway, we pulled together a bunch of good resources. I just put a link to our ABM page in the chat.
Okay.
You can look at that and then go to the third page of meeting materials and resources, and you'll see a whole folder on artificial turf resources. Take a look at those, because I think that'll give you sort of a good starting point in terms of some like policy language that you could potentially use.
thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else want to jump in on that?
I don't have any examples that I can speak to for Pasco County, but I do personally believe that it really depends on starting off with design standards that we have, such as you mentioned, permeability. Also, Caleb touched on even the smallest putting in a fire bush and making those incremental steps and moving forward with that. I did put in a link for the New Yard pattern book that's available online that does give multiple examples for single family homes for site plan and design standards as well.
Serana?
Hi, thanks so much. So I want to touch on a couple of things. So Maria and Caleb, thank you so much for your presentation. And Kevin Moran, thank you for bringing up residential. So this past weekend, I got the opportunity to speak with homeowners at the Pinellas County Lakes and Ponds Day, which was really great. And there was a homeowner, and bless his heart, he did everything he possibly could to engage with IFAS agents in Pinellas County to figure out, where can they put in native species to decrease the amount of fertilizer that his community is using. But his HOA blocked him, and their reason was these were people that had moved here from another region. A lot of them had moved from another region of the country where grass just grows readily, like in the Northeast. And so they had the same expectations for here, where it's a different climate, it's different. And because of the Florida friendly landscaping, yes, it's encouraged, but if there's like I hate to put it, no teeth to it, these situations will happen over and over again. It was so sad because he had done everything he possibly could, getting people out there, looking at how to make his community better, and he was blocked. And what's the point of having all these great resources if people can't actually get them done? So that was like a big aha moment for me of like, well, how do we fix this? Is this engaging with the property management associations, or what's a way that people who have initiative can improve our Florida waters in some way?
Yeah, I just want to comment that I moved. So it's a great question, Kevin. How do we do this? And I moved from Washington, D.C., that had incentives and disincentives for increasing impervious surface or increasing pervious. They had a disincentives. If you paved your backyard, that would be counted towards your stormwater fee. But on the other hand, they were generating funds from a single-use bag fee to help people convert turf or a solid concrete pavement to stormwater catchment areas. And so there was an incentive on one hand and a disincentive on another. I've talked to many people about this, and right now I'm not sure that this would get supported at the state level, but I think that those are some processes. I want to believe that people do stuff from the goodness of their heart and the well-being of their planet, but at the end of the day, I think financial disincentives and incentives are helpful processes for engaging a certain core people. That's what it's going to take to engage them. So that's just my thoughts.
I had a thought for Kevin. I think it would be most helpful if every cooperative extension or some government agency locally would produce brochures entitled Alternatives to Turf, and list and show examples, pictorial examples of food gardens, herb gardens, butterfly gardens, to give people concrete suggestions on how to convert, a little bit at a time or massively.
Thanks for those comments. Anyone else want to speak up? All right, well, thank you so much, Maria and Caleb, for your presentation. I learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did too. Please share it with me if you don't mind, and I'll get it posted on our website.